Hello and welcome to Nosotros, the podcast about San Antonio politics, history, and culture. I'm your host, Elaine Ayala, Metro columnist of the San Antonio Express News. My guest today is Rebecca Flores, Texas Director, or the retired Texas Director of the United Farm Workers. I have messed that up in various stories, to be sure, because I was starting to call her something else and she corrected me. But thank you so much for coming on Nosotros anyway. There's lots to talk about, but I want you to tell us about working with Cesar Chavez in the United Farm Workers. You were in Texas, but you were close. You were compadres. You were friends. So tell us a thing or two about this national labor leader and hero.
Well, he of course did an impossible job of organizing farm workers. Never had been done before in all of the history of this country. And there had been many attempts by the different unions during the Depression and all that, but never successful. And so what Cesar did with his intelligence and his connection to workers, because he himself had been a farm worker, he migrated up and down the West Coast, knew the work and knew the workers and knew the system very well. And so when he embarked on this idea of organizing farm workers, he did a couple of things that I think are amazing, and I don't think people do them today. Maybe some do, I don't know. But he had a very comfortable job. He was working with CSO in LA, in Los Angeles. And
the CSO,
the Community Service Organization. And they were doing good work in the cities, in the urban areas. They were registering workers, they were registering people, Latinos. They were changing citizenship laws, legal residence laws. So they were doing a lot of really good work with people who lived in LA. And he was the director, so he was making some good money. He was married. He had all these children. He had, I think, total of 8 children. And so he was pushing CSO to start organizing in the fields, organizing farm workers. And they said no. He was outvoted. So he quit the CSO. He quit that comfortable job from one day to the next. And he decided that he was going to do that. He was going to organize farm workers in the Delano area. So he took his family, Helen and his family of 8 kids, and he moved to Delano. And with nothing except some money that his brother Richard had saved, I think it was $2,500, they started the organization. At that time, it was called the National Farm Workers Association.
And Richard, wasn't he the one who drew up the flag?
Yeah, he put the flag together. And he did it very conscientiously about how do you do a symbol that everybody can copy easily. Not something artistic, and yet it is, right? But something that was totally diagonal. You know, you could draw straight lines, and I did.
Kid could do it.
Anybody can do it. And I did it. I did millions of those flags, and well, maybe not millions, but seemed like it's millions. So he started the union really because of his commitment. And he and his brother Richard, who was with him all the way, and Dolores Huerta. Dolores Huerta was also in CSO at the same time, but up in Santa Rosa, and Cesar was in LA. So Dolores had the same mind. She came from a different beginning, right? She was this teacher out of New Mexico, but she also had the same mind about organizing farm workers because she saw what was going on with farm workers. And so them too, their families, this is how you organize really. This is how you really organize, is you organize your family. And so he started talking to workers in all the fields, in all the grape fields there in the Delano area, while Helen worked in the fields and the kids worked in the fields. And so that's how that started. And the same thing with Dolores. Dolores, by that time, had a number of children herself. They started living in Delano. Really, by the grace of God, they managed because the community was supporting them. And so they had the support of the community. So once...
And when you say support of the community, you actually mean like
support.
Food.
Yes.
Food and...
Taking care of the kids,
uh-huh.
Housing, that kind of support, actual support. And then, of course, their own support for the idea. because as Cesar always said, that you would talk to workers and they would say, we can't do that. Because of the giant organizations and the giant industry that they were fighting against. I mean, we knew
it's a huge corporation.
How can you fight those guys?
Yeah.
How can you fight them? And so the workers would always say, no, we can't do that. So he began to say, look, but if we all get together, it's the idea of how you organize, right? If we all get together, and everybody knows that. Everybody would tell me when I was organizing, see, when you have, when your hand is like that, and you're walking and working by yourself, you can't do anything. But when you begin to count each other and you make a fist, because then you have 5 people together, then you have some power. Everybody understands that. El grano de arena. Everybody talked about grano de arena. We have to put our own grain of sand in this whole effort. So people's language, they understood it. They absolutely understood it. But so Cesar started organizing in that way. But when he organized, which was different from any kind of organization I've ever been, and actually it's the only one I've been in, but I worked with the National AFL-CIO too for a while, is that he brought in all our culture as part of the organization. So that when he would do anything, he would bring the work of Jesus, right, into the discussions at each of the meetings. The Virgen de Guadalupe was always present in all of the marches. The whole idea of marches, if that isn't from the work that we do as Christians, right, our pilgrimages, so he brought all of that, all of the way we are, our culture is, our Mexican culture is, right, into the whole question of how you organize workers. And he was successful. He started slow, one-on-one, right? That's how you organize, one person at a time. Then he built a whole idea of house meetings where you have 10 people, right? And then you grow that. And then you grow that. And you grow that until you become powerful. And then once you get powerful, then you can do something. But you can't do something unless you have that power, unless you have the conscience built up by those workers about what and why they are doing this and how they can keep their families safe. All of that is such great concern to poor people, because they would always say, pero ¿quién le va a dar de comer a mis hijos? If I join you, who's going to feed my kids? And so what we would many times do and say to folks was, usted está, ¿verdad? But somebody else works in the family. So, so that there's always some kind of income so people don't become so desperate. But in some cases, people did, in fact, turn all of their lives into work with the union, and many did, and that's how he built his staff. And his staff, and I was one of them, we got paid $5 a week, and that was consciously done, right? And when I reflect on it, of course, I had a husband, who was bringing in some money, but even then, there's both negative and positive to that, right? But even then, it was like, when you have money in your pocket, and you know this, Elaine, as well as I do, is that you want to spend it. You go to the stores and you look around and you buy some crazy stuff that you don't need. And all of a sudden you become a consumer of things that you don't absolutely need. And so when I have been thrifty all my life, probably to an extreme point, but only recently I've noticed that I'm buying some things, right? But it's saved a lot of my attention to stay away from buying and going to the mall and going to all these things, and really put it to mind to what really is most important in my life.
And it shows. One of the things that has always confused me, and I think I'm not alone, is that at a point of the union's history, there was also other unions being created around farm workers. And there was one in Texas, of course, and not affiliated with the United Farm Workers. Explain that to us. When did that happen, and why was that happening, in your opinion?
Well, the United Farm Workers started in 1966. They went through this huge fight with the grape industry in California. With a boycott, national boycott, international boycott. Lots of work went into doing that. Finally getting some contracts, first ever for farm work, where workers were finally given some decent wages, decent conditions to work in, and decent benefits. Cesar started the union in 1966, and Antonio Rendain was an official in the union. He was secretary treasurer, I believe. And so in 1966, also there was a big strike in Rio Grande City, if you remember, and the melon strikers there struck in the fields in Starr County, and then of course they got busted by the Texas Rangers. They started a march that came from Rio Grande City up to Austin in the summer of '66.
That's what I remember really from reading about it.
And so, anyway, so then Tony was sent here as the director of the United Farm Workers in Texas, and he was here, I believe, from '68 on. In the summer of 1973, Jim Harrington. I was married to Jim Harrington at the time, and I moved to the Valley,
Jim Harrington being an incredible civil rights attorney, now retired, of course, but was also legendary in his own right.
And so, so we moved to the Valley. We were in school at the I was in the University of Michigan. He was in University of Detroit going to law school. And so we graduated and we got married and we came down here to live. And so in the summer of '73, we arrived. And so I got a job. He started working with the union as the ACLU attorney in the union hall there in San Juan, and working with Tony Orendain and others, right, other people who were there at that time. And then there was everything that happens was really, it was what was happening in California was impacting us here in Texas. And so in '73, the Teamsters started fighting with the union in California in '73, and there was a long, protracted fight there, and a lot of the attention was being given to California. Cesar was focused on California. They were trying to pass the Ag Labor Relations Act, so there was a lot of attention being paid there. And Tony wanted attention being paid to Texas, and that's fine. That's you're right about that, and but he got it into his mind thinking that he could do it on his own, and that he wanted to do things his way. And I had a difference of opinion in his way. His way, as I saw it, because I saw it, I was down there, was pulling people out of the fields and having strikes. And that sounds real romantic and real strong and all of that. But the only way you can survive a strike is if people have income coming into their households and if they know what they're fighting about. But what Tony would do was he would get his group of people, and there were just, I would say it was about 10, 20 folks, and they would go to a field and he would demand that the workers come out. And that's a big thing to put on workers. I firmly believe it, because they're losing that wage for that day, and they don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So that was his style. And
it sounds more confrontational.
Very much, yeah, very different. And he's a man. He was a man. And then in 1975, there was a huge strike in the Valley, again with the melon pickers. And melons are a short season. They're ready to be picked. They get very ripe and then they're gone. It's like 4 weeks, and so you have about 2 weeks of peak. And so Tony was.
You're talking about watermelons, right?
No, cantaloupes.
Cantaloupes, yeah. Okay.
And so Tony was at the Hidalgo Bridge in Reynosa, passing out flyers, and the workers I think they said, okay, we'll do it. And so there was what we call a Wildcat Strike, means that there was no organization whatsoever. People said, we're not working anymore. And so it was all over the Valley, and it was really out of control. There was no way Tony could control it. There was no way. And so there was some nasty, awful, ugly pictures on national TV and worker against worker,
Was there violence?
Well, they were throwing things at each other, but there was violence on the side of the growers. They pulled out guns. They shot some workers. And so there was a lot of violence. I mean, guns by the growers against workers. And there was some throwing things at workers from workers against workers. And it did not, one of the things that Cesar always said, once you start violence in any way, you got to cut it out. You got to quit, because it can get out of control. And so those heated arguments between Cesar and Tony were pretty heated. And so Tony, in that summer of 75, decided that he wanted to do things his way. And so he came to Austin and formed the Texas Farm Workers Union. It was what I call it was a nonprofit organization where you just claim the name and you file it with the Secretary of State, and that was pretty much what it was. It had no membership, and so that was in the August of 1975, and so there was we're trying to negotiate with him. In our position, Jim Harrington's position and my position, and others who had been working with Cesar for a while, workers who had been in California, said farm workers need one strong union. One strong union. We cannot have these small unions because we don't have any power. We don't have power right now. We never did have power. We probably don't have any now either. And we always believed in one and only one union, right, for farm workers. And so we told Tony, we're not going to go with you, Tony. Even though we were friends, we had baptized one of his sons. We were friends of his and his wife, Rachel. They were good people. And we said, we can't go with you, Tony, on this. And so we didn't. And he formed his union, his group, and then we stayed with United Farm Workers. And then we had a long and bitter separation. Right, it was a bitter separation for a few years, and then finally we got over it. I became it was October or November of 1975. The Secretary Treasurer of the union at that time was Gil Padilla, and he came down to the Valley and said, "Well, Rebecca, I think you're going to have to be the director." And I had just had a baby. My son Isaac was born in 1975. And I said, "But Gilbert, I had two little boys at that time." I said, "I can't do that." He says, "Rebecca, just do it for a year." Fatal agreement there. I said, "Okay, I'll just do it for a year. Just do it for the transition, right?" And so I became director of the United Farm Workers because of that. It wasn't because I showed great acumen at organizing. It didn't show that I had all of this going for me, but it was because I was there. And really, it was amazing is that I'm a woman, right? And that I took on. It was if anybody analyzes this whole picture, and if anybody cares to analyze it, really, maybe it's not that important, is how the union went from this strong masculine figure, which was Tony. He used to wear a black hat, and he's passed away, by the way. So I'm not talking any.
Que en paz descanse.
Que en paz descanse. He had a black hat, big mustache. He looked like Emiliano Zapata, and he wanted to be looked at that way. And then you have the transition to this woman, pregnant woman, right, with two little babies hanging on her skirt, and that is something. That is a picture that somebody should take one day.
And that today, the president of the United Farm Workers is a woman too.
And she is a woman, yes.
Were there other unions popping up in other parts of the country?
Yes, at that very same time, it was very peculiar, and I don't know, it was conspiracy, but you never know. Because Cesar was having these huge fights with the Teamsters Union. You don't know, right? You don't know why these other unions popped up. But at the same time that Texas Farm Workers was the idea was, in fruition, there was a thing called the Arizona Farm Workers Union, and then there was the Florida Farm Workers Union. So we had three, and these states are very agriculture. Mm-hmm. Three organizations that were floating up to the top about they wanted to form their own union. Of course, we're still around, right? And they're not still around. And that was the argument that we had, is that unless you have a strong foundation, and that is the difference, that we had a strong foundation of beliefs. Yes. And that's what carried us through. Well, that was in 75. We're already, 2025 almost. That's 50 years. And then we're still...
You're still around.
And we're still around, yeah.
And still lobbying Congress on various important topics related to the safety of farm workers, especially in the heat. It's not just about water, but about shade and other things that are just fundamental to any workplace.
Yeah. But, the lobby for agriculture is all the time, 24/7, and they have a lot of strong lobby. It's not only the Farm Bureau, but it's the oil and gas, because they do all the chemicals. There's so many different lobbies that are working with the agricultural industry and against farm workers. The whole issue of pesticides really comes out of the oil industry, right? And
because they make them.
They make them. And so the big fight that we had in the 80s, if you remember, was the whole issue of how chemicals are being used on the food that we eat. And this is the oil industry that's developing. And they don't want to lose that contract with those growers, right? They want to continue to make chemicals. They want to continue to sell them. And that's what they're doing now. And it's difficult to slow that down, to stop them, because EPA, one, doesn't have the people to investigate all of the chemicals that are being put on the market to see the impact that it has on human beings. Does not have the abilities. And so we are flooded now with chemicals that are destroying our environment, and affecting the soil, the food that we eat,
the water,
the people who eat it, and on and on and on. And so if you look at from the ground up, what's from the ground up? Well, it's all of us. And and unless a lot of consumers, and that was the intent of the Great Boycott of the 80s, a lot of consumers know this and begin to act on it. Then we have become,
stop buying grapes, mm-hmm. and they stop buying lettuce. Mm-hmm. At least mm-hmm. some very vocal people.
Well, I hope that the education about the chemicals is also what stayed with folks, because it was like millions of people who were not eating those mm-hmm. products, but people forget.
Yes.
People forget.
You said something earlier about maybe we were never powerful. And did you really mean that?
Well, we were never organized, I mean, look, and I'm not saying that we did it all, but when we arrived in 1973, when Jim and I arrived to the Valley, it was like 100,000, 200,000 workers down there. And it was a locked-in labor force. I call that strip between the border and the river and Falfurrias like a strip where people are locked in, because once you cross the border, and then you can't get out because you have checkpoints on each sides, and it's a locked-in workforce, right?
Yeah, and they're trapped in that. They can't move past.
They can't get out, and the industry fed on it. The ag industry fed on it, and so you could not get anything from the industry unless you organized. And until the organization occurred, which is what we did, we couldn't get anything out of them. Finally, we started organizing, doing the house meeting, method, which we learned from Fred Ross and from Cesar. We started doing house meetings, and we would have. I think I had house meetings every night for about 5 years.
Oh, yeah.
And
I thought you were only going to do the job for one year. How many years was it altogether?
30. So every night, me and 6 farm workers, we organized. We hired these farm workers right out of the fields. They were all guys who knew the industry from the bottom up. They knew the crew leaders. They knew the work. They knew everything. They knew the companies. And so we trained them. Fred Ross trained them, and Fred Ross was a fantastic trainer. And then we went about the business of organizing. And within a year, we started organizing the summer of 78, spring of 78. And then in January of 79, we had our first UFW, United Farm Workers Convention in Pharr, Texas. And we had 1,000 farm workers that sat there as delegates to that farm worker convention. First ever convention.
That was
1979. The first farm
I was there.
Were you?
Yes, I was covering it for the Corpus Christi Caller Times.
Were you really? Oh my God.
I have a picture of myself that was, our photographer took, at the Caller Times, took a photographer of just the huge audience, because it was really impressive. Mm-hmm. And and my mother looked at it and said, "There you are." And it was really? Up in the rafters, like talking to people.
The rafters. Oh my gosh, look at you.
Yeah. One of my first
that was the first UFW convention in the state of Texas, where we had 1,000 farm workers sitting there. And the beauty of that, and I always say that what I was setting up at the platform, right, with Cesar and the other folks. We invited all kinds of guests to come and see and speak and stuff. The beauty of that whole was that for the first time, farm workers were sitting down. We gave them all the resolutions that they had passed, actually from the House meetings on the way up. Mm-hmm. They had pencils in their hands, and they were asked to vote.
Yes.
That was the first time. So I have pictures of farm workers. We would say, ¿Y cómo les ve con esta resolución? Todos a favor, levanten su mano. And they would raise their hand. I have these fantastic photos of farm workers raising their hand and voting. Can you believe the importance of that, of just that, of saying, yes, I am doing this.
I also remember that at one point, Cesar Chavez could sense that a resolution was not favorable, that the group did not altogether approve, but that they somehow didn't want to say no. And he was so magnificent. He sensed that and found the wording to make them feel better about telling him no. It was just beautiful. I think it sounded almost as if he was supportive, and I can't recall what it was at the time. It was so many years ago. It was my very first reporting job. It was just beautiful to see him that way. Okay, I wanted to also ask, 30 years of this work. You've been retired how many years now?
I retired in 2005, so I've been retired
a good long time.
Yeah.
So it's hard to keep an activist down. And I tell you, when I drive past your house on the way to my goddaughter's house, over the years, I've seen some very tall sunflowers in your front yard. And then I've seen signs that I know you've drawn up. I can tell you're writing now because I've seen signs elsewhere that you've written out.
Those are mine.
Handwritten signs. And they're in the ground. And, it almost sounds like freedom for sunflowers. Because you are violating some sort of code, and code compliance have been around, or somebody reported you because your sunflowers are too tall. So you get involved in a lot of things. So I want to hear about your sunflower battle. When did it start, and what is it about? Why does code compliance come around?
That's what I want to know. There are so many problems in the city that why does code compliance come after me and Kamala Platt? Because our sunflowers are so tall. Who are they bothering? It is the whole idea that I think, part of the colonization of this country is that our lawns have to be nice and green and mowed, right? And look.
You feel like it's a colonized lawn.
Yeah. It's my lawn. This is the only piece of property that I own. Okay. This is it. What is it?
It's small. It's
small.
Beautiful.
It's little.
By the way, your house is beautiful.
Thank you so much. But it's small. And then and this is mine, right? This is mine. I can do what I want with it. And then for the city to come and tell me that, no, my flowers aren't nice. You know what? I think you have other bigger fights to fight. And frankly, I think that what I do and what Kamala Platt does with her sunflowers in the West Side is that we are mitigating some of the heat that we're suffering there. I live, as you know, next to Nogalitos, which is a busy street, and next to the freeway.
Highway 90, which is just beaming with heat with heat from all those cars. Yes.
And 35. So I'm 35 south, 90 east and west, Nogalitos.
Absolutely.
And so I'm thinking, doesn't the city know that we are right in the middle of some climate issues and that heat is one of them and that it creates all this heat? And shouldn't we be protecting the population? by doing each individual can do a small thing. That's all I'm saying is that you and I, we have power. And I don't think people understand they have power. They have power. You have your own power. And I think people have given it up. Oh, ya no puedo. The city is going to come. Well, you know what? You have power. You can say something about it. And so in the Battle of the Flowers, there's the Battle of Flowers.
Oh, it's another Battle of the Flowers. Okay, I feel the headline coming on.
I feel something here. In that battle that Kamala Platt and I started, we started talking about this because we think that there's a lot of how do you organize using social media? This is the idea of house meetings, but not personal, right? Mm-hmm. How do you organize? Well, I think if you're going to use social media, let's use it this way. So we're trying to find allies around the city of San Antonio, and we found some already who are saying the same thing, right? I mean, I found Enelia Obregón in Austin. I found Liz Robbins up in the north side. She's a naturalist. Kamala Platt, of course. And there's others.
Who's Kamala? Tell us about her.
She's a wonderful woman who lives in the west side. She was born in India, but she's not, she's an Anglo. But she was born in Kansas, grew up in India with her parents. And so she has all that mix of knowledge, right, of being in another country and understanding
West and
that,
East. Mm-hmm.
and understanding that and how they live and how they started. She's a fantastic woman, and she's an environmentalist, and she teaches at ASU, Arizona State, and anyway, she's very knowledgeable. But she's also saying, why can't we do this in our yards? Why does it? And so everybody says, well, people complain. But we think people are complaining because they've learned, because it's learned, right? It's learned that everyone should have a green lawn and you shouldn't have wildflowers growing on it. So we got to unlearn that. And how do we start unlearning it? We unlearn it one person at a time. And so that's kind of my fight, right? Is leave me alone. These flowers are doing something. These sunflowers are doing something for us, for not only for me, but for us. And one day I stuck my head right in the center of the sunflowers, and it was the best smell in the world. There was bugs flying around, and it was just a wonderful smell. I have never put chemicals on my lawn. Never. It's weeds, and it's fine.
Yes.
And so
Me too.
So the soil was a beautiful experience, and I think everybody should do that.
But when code compliance did come around, did you have to cut some? What?
Yes.
Tell us about that interaction, because we might need to know how to defend ourselves with a code compliance officer.
Well, they were okay. So you know how my lawn is. My lawn is my flowers are set aside, from the sidewalk. Mm-hmm. But the sunflowers are long, and so they were drooping over onto the sidewalk, and so also
was it getting in the way of pedestrians?
Must have. And so then I have the fence, and there's a little spot between the fence and the sidewalk that I was growing some sunflowers there too, right? And so they were drooping over onto the sidewalk, along with my ruellias. I don't know if anybody knows what the ruellia is, but it's like a long-legged flower. It's like a purple pansy or something. And so that was also drooping, and it's short, right? That was also drooping on the sidewalk. And so this code compliance woman, I think her last name was Caballero, she comes and she says,
"Thanks for being so specific there."
I remember her. And so she's young. So I'm outside for some reason. So I'm outside, and she sees me and she stops. She says to me, "I have been by here 3 times." You believe
That's
that?
a lot of work.
That's a lot of work for some sunflowers that were drooping over the sidewalk. And she says, "And you must cut down those sunflowers that are drooping over the." I said, "Okay."
Did she mean all of them or just those?
Just the ones that were. I said, "No problem. I'll cut them," because the truth of the matter is that I don't want them bothering people in in my neighborhood, because I have to live in my neighborhood, and I want good neighbors. I want friendly neighbors. So I said, "Not a problem." So I cut them down in front of her face, and then there was that ruellia, that
one ruellia.
I said, "And what about that ruellia?" She says, "Yes, cut it down." She was unrelenting.
Well, thank you for that rendition of the story.
So,
it's excellent.
Isn't that fantastic? It's kind of like in my brain forever.
Well, on behalf of the city, I mean, I don't want to defend them, but there is such a thing as urban forestry in our city of San Antonio. And I'll have to tell you that they were very kind to me and that I live in 78200, a place that has been studied for their lack of trees or not enough trees or too many trees, especially pecan trees that are dying. They're going to probably die in the next 10 to 20 years. I've already had 2 that died. So, during the pandemic, I got a little, card from the urban forestry folks that said, because there's this, need for more trees in your neighborhood, would you like one? We'll plant it for you. Mm-hmm. And I chose a Mexican sycamore because the leaves kind of flap and make a little noise. I love them. And they're real billowy. So, sure enough, right around at the tail end of the pandemic, these guys showed up. I told them where I wanted to put it. I had to move it a little over because the spot I picked was a little bit too close to the water line, and they planted, and it's got to be like 30 feet now. It's a beautiful tree. So maybe there's a tree in your future from the urban forestry department.
Well, they planted one. Didn't tell me what. Just came up one day, and it's the Mexican plum, which is bitter, and it's beautiful.
It's more ornamental than.
But people don't know that, so I have all these people come up under my plum tree and start eating it and spitting, of course, the plum out because it's bitter. So somebody said, "Well, why don't you make jelly out of it?" I said, "You'd have to put so much sugar in that to make any kind of jelly." I said, "What's the purpose of it?" So I have been asking I go to Fanix because they know everything. I said, "What do I do with this tree?" He says, "Well, you really have to cut it down." I said, "Because I want to como injertar a peach tree or something like graft." I said, "How do you do it? Can I just do it on one section of the tree?" He says, "No. You have to cut the whole thing. Leave the trunk. It's got all those roots in it, and then just
that doesn't seem like the right thing to do.
It doesn't." And I said, "Well, maybe not."
But grafting is the thing now.
Yeah. So anyway,
So besides the sunflower, and before we say goodbye and end this podcast, are there other issues at top of mind these days that are taking up your activist time?
There are a lot of issues out there. And I guess what I want to leave in everybody's mind is that we have power. Every one of us has some power. If we would only use it, right? And so I asked my friends. I said, just make a phone call. Use your influence. Do whatever, right? But try to change things as they are. I will tell you what I'm working on right now.
Okay.
I am working with the Interfaith Welcome Coalition at the bus stations.
The Interfaith Welcome Coalition.
And so we greet the immigrants as they come through. And you know that we have some battles that are there now and that are coming down the pike, and we're going to have to learn how to defend ourselves and immigrants in the process. So I do that. I also trying to think. I'm working with the people at Brackenridge Park. There is a group of us who are opposed to the work that the city of San Antonio, the Brackenridge Park Conservancy, and this other stakeholders group is proposing to do at Brackenridge Park. And what they're doing now, and what is very obvious to me, because I go there and I see it, is that they're planning on chopping down 48 trees, removing 19. I can't imagine how you can remove a tree and think you can replant it without it dying. So I think we have a problem with about 60 trees in the park, in our Brackenridge Park, and then also harassing the egrets and the herons so that they're not building their nests there. And I think that is wrong. I think that is so wrong what they're doing. And there's no way that we've been able to integrate or get our message across to these two groups. And you should see the list who's on these groups. And there is nobody that we know on there. And they have 5 neighborhood associations that just circle the park. Monte Vista, Mankey, West Fort, Tobin Hill, and a couple of others. They're just around the park.
They don't like the birds? Or they
No,
support the birds?
But they're okay with what's going on. But who goes to the park? Tell me who goes to the park.
Chicanos?
Tell me. People from the west side.
Yeah.
There's not one organization, not one neighborhood association on the west side, from the east side or the south side. Not one. Not one. And they have these folks here who are apparently okay with the shooting up in the sky with these pistols, these air pistols, and with clapping these 2x4s.
It's to scare them off, right?
To scare them off. Mm-hmm. But in that scaring off, the birds don't nest. What happens to those birds? Well, they might die. This is their path of migration. It's been going on for hundreds and thousands of years. And all of a sudden, the city of San Antonio wants to break up that path. And should they? And that is but it's also
bizarre. It's a bizarre.
You should go there. They do it all the time. They're from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Let me just tell you one thing that happened. This was during Easter. You know who's out there Easter weekend, right?
Oh, definitely.
Okay. So I was there Good Friday, and they were shooting up in the air. This is when people are sleeping there and clapping the 2x4s. So I called.
Oh, they sleep there because they're holding on to their spot for Easter Sunday. Of course, my family used to do it too.
Yes. They're there all the time.
Yeah. They're holding on to their spot for their big Easter gathering.
Yeah. And this is part of our Easter tradition.
Yes.
This is part of the resurrection of Jesus, where we go and celebrate his resurrection. So it's part of our Catholic traditions, Christian traditions, but also of our cultural traditions, going on for generations. And so there they are, shooting up in the air, clapping the 2x4s, bothering people. And so just happened that I went and talked to one of the campers, and she said she was bipolar. And that when they started shooting up at 6 a.m., that she got anxious and very nervous. So I called. It was Friday, so city staff was working. So I called our offices in the city to say, aren't you concerned about what you're doing as a city to disturb people who have disabilities? Couldn't find anybody to do anything about it. And for 4 days, while those people were there camping out, they were clapping those 2x4s and shooting up in the air.
And it's an air rifle or air pistol?
Something, I don't know what it is.
It's not a gun.
It's not a gun. But it tries to shoo them away. But nevertheless, it impacts you. I mean, how would you like to be shocked every once in a while by hearing this shot?
There's a whole anti-egret movement out there, because I remember the egrets were also part of the Elmendorf. Yeah. It was a big deal to get them move from there.
The city is trying to do away with all the urban rookeries, apparently, but cannot we live with nature? I mean, what is the problem with that? So here we have the egrets living here on this tree, and there is a fence, a cyclone fence right there. And guess what's on the other side of that fence? The zoo with birds. So what do you think? You think the zoo birds are unaffected by this noise? I don't understand the logic. I don't understand why they can't listen to us, but they are not listening to us. So I'm working with some folks there who are fantastic folks, who are environmentalists, who really want to protect nature and the birds and the trees. So that's some other thing that I'm working on, and some other stuff. And of course, my sunflowers.
And you are a very outspoken person on Fiesta. And because this is Fiesta week, I'm going to give you a minute to talk about why you don't like Fiesta. Well, there's lots of good reasons, but
it all started in 1836. Okay, must we go back then?
Yes. It's a good time. It's why it's there. It's why it's there.
Yeah. Well, you look at it. You look at who's up on those floats and up on those crowns, and who's carrying the crowns on their heads, and there's so much elitism in this country. And here we are, majority in this city, most of us of Mexican descent, and we are celebrating that event and the elitism that comes with it, and the elitism. And the Cavaliers, tell me how many people of Mexican descent or Latino, one guy.
Well, there's a few others, but
really?
Yeah, there's a few, but it's a tiny fraction of the greater.
Yeah. And I watch them as I walk by, and I'm looking a black person, looking for a brown person, is very, very hard to find. Very hard to find. And so it's that. And here we are so enamored with that. And we have got to wake up. And we have to have our own celebrations, right? And I'm not saying that we shouldn't. And I think there's an attempt doing the parade in the West Side and those kinds of things, which are fine because we need to have some celebration. But gee, why are we celebrating that elitism in this town? And because it's everywhere. I mean, look at Bragg Park. Look who's managing that fight. And if it's not a bunch of elites in the city of San Antonio that really want to gentrify the park for Pearl. That's where I think that's going. As Pearl gets more and more developed, where are those people going to walk their dogs? Tell me if it's not Bragg Park. So they want to clean it up for the folks at Pearl and bless those folks at Pearl because they're paying a lot of money for rent. And, they're living in just concrete there. I'm sorry for them. But you know what? As I live on the corner of 90 and 35 with all the fumes, where can I go to get fresh air? Tell me where I can go to get fresh air. You can't go to that park down the street on Collins Gardens because it's just a few trees, right? Mm-hmm. You have to have a massive amount of trees so that you can get that clean air. Mm-hmm. We don't have it in San Antonio. We don't have it on the West Side. Brackenridge Park really is the only park that we have had that is big enough that allows us to have that clean and fresh air. And of course, they want to move us out of there, and we have got to put on our moños. And we have got to go after it because they're going to take it away. They're absolutely going to take it away.
Well, Rebecca, moños and all, God, it's a pleasure to talk with you each and every time. I can't remember. It's probably been 30 years of interviewing you over the years about one thing or another, and it never, ever disappoints. So thank you so much for coming on. I'm really appreciative. Please share this twice a month podcast episodes with your friends and family. The video version of Nosotros can be found on YouTube, but you can listen to our podcast at expressnews.com under the podcast tab on the homepage, as well as all the other places you get your podcast. My Metro column appears Wednesdays and Fridays in the Express News, and my email address is eayala@express-news.net. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening and for watching.